Students, in lesson 1.3, we are going to be working with properties. Our essential question for this lesson is, how can you use properties of operations to solve problems? You can use the properties of operations to help you evaluate numerical expressions more easily. So at this point at home, I want you to pause the video and I would like you to copy down both of these charts of the properties. Now that you've copied down the different properties for addition and multiplication, we're going to go over them. So in your notebook, you should have commutative property of addition, and it says if the order of the addends change, the sum stays the same. And you have this example, 12 plus 7 would give you the same sum as 7 plus 12. Next, associative property of addition. If the grouping of the addends change, the sum stays the same. So in the first we have 5 plus parentheses 8 plus 14 and parentheses. But if we change the grouping symbols to be at the front, we would still get the same answer. 8 plus 5 then plus 14 would still give us the same answer as the first numerical expression. Next, the identity property of addition. The sum of any number and 0 is that number. So here we have the example, 13 plus 0 will always be 13. Next we have the properties of multiplication. So first we see commutative property of multiplication. If the order of the factors changes, the product stays the same. So here we see 4 times 9 would give us the same answer as 9 times 4. And again, you should have the name of the property, its definition, and the example in your math notebook. Next, the associative property of multiplication. If the grouping of the factors changes, the product stays the same. So what we can see here is that we have 11 times, in parentheses, 3 times 6, and parentheses. We change the grouping symbols to be around the 11 times the 3. However, we'll multiply the 6 and we will get the same exact product. And lastly, we have the identity property of multiplication. The product of any number and 1 is that number. Here we have 4 times 1 to demonstrate that idea. So we're going to start with the unlock the problem. The table shows the number of bones in several parts of the human body. What is the total number of bones in the ribs, the skull, and the spine? So it says to find the sum of the addends, use mental math. You can use the commutative and associative properties. So it says to use properties to find 24 plus 28 plus 26. So what we do here is we have 24 plus 28 plus 26, and what we can do is we can change the order. If we put the 24 next to the 26, we would be using the commutative property. To reorder the addends. Next, what we're going to do is we're actually going to put grouping symbols around the 24 and the 26 because we know if we add those together we're going to get a number that ends in 0, so that would be very helpful for us because it's easier for our head to do that mentally. So we know 24 plus 26 is 50, and we used the associative property here to group the addends. And now we can use mental math to solve this. 50 plus 28 would give us 78. So there are 78 bones in the ribs, the skull, and the spine. Now we're going to do the math talk in class, so you can just hold off on that for now. So now the last property, which is the trickiest of all of them, is called the distributive property. And you also have to write this in your math notebook with the definition and the example. So it says multiplying a sum by a number is the same as multiplying each addend by the number and then adding the products. So what we see here is we're adding together these two numbers and then we're multiplying by 5 and we would get an answer. What you can also do is multiply 5 by both of those individual addends and then add those products together at the end. The distributive property can also be used with multiplication and subtraction. For example, 2 times parentheses 10 minus 8 and parentheses is equal to parentheses 2 times 10 and parentheses minus parentheses 2 times 8 end parentheses. So don't worry too much about this because we're going to be able to explore this a lot this year. But we want to get familiar with the properties because we're going to see them come through every single chapter in Go Math. So students, again, distributive property is a very important property that we'll be exploring throughout 5th grade. So make sure that you just have taken the opportunity to copy good notes about this in your notebook. So what we're going to do is we're going to start here with example 1, and we're going to use the distributive property to find the product. So one way we can do that is we can use addition. So here we see 8 times 59, and it says we can use multiples of 10 to write 59 as a sum. So multiples of 10, those are the answers in a multiplication problem. So what I'm going to write out here is the multiples of 10. So 10 times 1 is 10, that's the first multiple. 10 times 2 is the second multiple. 10 times 3, the third multiple would be 30. 10 times 4 would be 40, that's the fourth multiple of 10. And 10 times 5 is 50, which is the fifth multiple of 10. So we can break apart 59 to being 50 plus 9. And remember, we didn't lose any numbers, simply we're just breaking this part into 2 pieces. So now, in the next step, what we can do is we can say 8 times 50. So we can see we took those 2 numbers from there, and then we do 8 times 9, the other piece that we broke it into. So we know that 8 times 5 is 40, so 8 times 50 would be 400. Next, we do 8 times 9 is 72. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to using mental math to add this together, and we get 472. Now another way we can do that is we can use subtraction. So again, we're going to use the multiples of 10 to write 59 as a difference. So this time, we're going to go to the 6th multiple of 10, which is 60. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up 59 into 60 minus 1. And you might say, well, where did I get 60, Miss G? 60 is the 6th multiple of 10, and remember, we're using multiples of 10. And if we do 60 minus 1, we get back to 59, which is our original number. So now what we're going to do is we're going to multiply 8 times 60, and then we're going to subtract that from multiplying 8 times 1, which is the other part that we broke up 59 into. When we did 60 minus 1, we have to make sure that we bring those 2 numbers down. So remember, the 60 is going here, and the 1 is going there. So now we're going to use the distributive property. We know that 8 times 6 is 48. So 8 times 60 must be 480. And next, we know that 8 times 1 is 8. So now we can do subtraction, and we can use mental math to subtract. 480 minus 8 will give us 472. So now we'll go on to example 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete the equation and tell which property we use. So we think to ourselves, 23 times what number would give you the product of 23? Well, we know that would only be 1. So we know that the properties, if we go back to the beginning, what property in multiplication used 1? Well, I see that the property that used multiplication as 1, we see that that is the identity property of multiplication. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in that to be the identity property of multiplication, because we know that any number times 1 is itself. So next we're going to go on to the next problem. We see the next problem says 47 times 15 is the same as 15 times 47. So now when we change the order, we know that we're showing the commutative property of multiplication. So regardless of the order, we know that our answer will be the same. The product will be the same. So remember, in this lesson, we were using all the different properties that we would maybe need to encounter for this chapter. So we worked on the properties of addition and the properties of multiplication, and we were introduced to a new property distributive property. Make sure you take really good notes for this lesson and that you're practicing the definitions of the properties at home.